Scandal is the theme of the Nobel Prizes for Literature between 2010 and 2016. There was a scandal about the committee's choice of an American singer-songwriter. There was a scandal about a Belarusian journalist, a right-wing maverick Latin American politician. There was a sex scandal brewing inside the committee, and there was the hidden abuse scandal of a much-loved short story writer. I'm Jeff Rich. This is the Burning Archive. We're approaching the end of the 120 Nobels Challenge. It's been a long journey, and we're almost at the end. And in this video, I'm giving you introductions to the 7 winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature between 2010 and 2016. Now, please, I'd also like to extend an invitation to you to join me live for my live stream of the Nobel's announcement on the 10th of October from approximately 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. The Nobel's announcement will be approximately at 10 p.m, but I'll be reviewing both the hot tips and this long journey through 120 Nobel Prizes that I've been taking over the last 120 days on the Burning Archive. So the 2010s were amongst the most scandalous years of the Nobel Prize, culminating, I think, in a historic low in 2017. And do go to jeffrich.substack.com where you'll be able to find the full archive of all the Nobel Prize for Literature winners since 1901, my profiles, links to some of their work and samples of some of their work, even a few readings of some of their work by myself. jeffrich.substack.com. You can take up both a free and a paid subscription and support the work of the Burning Archive to help you live well now with history and literature. So 2010, Mario Vargas Llosa, a Peruvian novelist, journalist, essayist and former politician. I did read Vargas Llosa's novels a long time ago, in my 20s, back when Latin America was benighted by several US-sponsored military dictatorships. His novels began in the 60s and 70s and included The Time of the Hero, which is an odd translation of a book which in Spanish literally meant The City and the Dogs, The Greenhouse, Conversation in the Cathedral, the well-known, perhaps, Aunt Julia and the Scriptwriter, which was later made into a film and is just a great title, The War of the End of the World from 1981, The Real Life of Alejandro Maita, and then there's a big gap to The Feast of the Goat in the year 2000, which looked at the effects, that last novel, at the effects of authoritarianism, violence and the abuse of power on the individual, modelled on the leader of the real leader of the Dominican Republic from 1930 to 1960. I don't have many memories of Vargas Llosa's fiction, but I do recall some satire about the machismo of Latin American political military culture. But he did write comedies, murder mysteries, historical novels and political thrillers. And in the commendation from the Nobel Committee, there's a little bit of an ideological tone, which points to, I guess, Vargas Llosa's other life as a very political figure. He wrote, they said, he was awarded the prize, they said, for his cartography of structures of power and his trenchant images of their individuals' resistance, revolt and defeat. He was long politically active. He expressed sentimental support for the Cuban Revolution. What else would a Latin American do in the era of decolonization? But like many, like American neoconservatives, he migrated from a soft left position to a very hard liberal neoconservative, you might say, position in later years. He was an ardent critic of nationalism and a strong supporter of American free market policies. Indeed, he ran to become president of Peru in 1990, where he proposed a rather austere, hard liberal economic shock therapy for the country. And he was later involved in various sort of US-sponsored transnational activities, the Mont Pelerin Society and the Inter-American Dialogue. Even as late as 2023, he expressed his support for the Argentinian right-wing libertarian, now president, Javier Milei. But back in 1990, Vargas Llosa lost his election and he sort of returned, I guess, to writing, went to Madrid, lived sort of in, not quite exile, certainly a comfortable life in Spain and on the North American speaking circuit. He even appeared in the Panama Papers, a bit of a whiff of scandal there. And in his later years, his regrets about the change in culture came through. He wrote a book, Notes on the Death of Culture, which echoed former Nobel Laureate T.S. Eliot's essay of a similar name. And in that I wrote an essay on this back in 2015. He wrote, the great majority of humanity does not engage with, produce or appreciate any form of culture other than what used to be considered by cultured people, disparagingly, as mere popular pastimes with no links to the intellectual, artistic and literary activities that were once at the heart of culture. He was a bit of a disenchanted pessimist, and perhaps the Burning Archive and you here on YouTube prove him wrong. 2011, Tomas Tranströmer, who was a Swedish poet. He was also a psychologist in the social welfare system, and within Sweden, which gave a kind of a grounded reality to both his experience and his poetry. His poetry is very much rooted in Sweden's sort of winters, long winters, and its natural environment, and seeks to find wonder in everyday life. He is considered one of the major Swedish poets of the 21st, 20th centuries. But there was a scandal here to some degree, I guess. Not a huge scandal. But he was largely unknown, I guess, outside Sweden. It's another one of the perhaps over-representation of the Nordic countries in the Nobel Prize. His poetry is accessible, and Tranströmer himself was actually friends with the well-known American poet Robert Bly, who also translated some of his poetry. And somewhat like Robert Bly, Tranströmer stood apart from artistic movements and politics and focused on more psychological issues in his poetry. He's even been called a Christian religious poet. I have two books of his poetry. One small little volume here, For the Living and the Dead, and his new collected poems as well. Let me just give you a sample of the relatively beautiful writing that he does do with, appropriately for Sweden's environment, a poem called Six Winters, which is kind of almost like, I don't know if they're formally haiku, but they're very brief poems. 6 brief poems providing images of winter. In the dark hotel, a child is sleeping. Outside, the winter night where the great-eyed dice are rolling. 2. An elite of the petrified dead in Katarina churchyard, where the wind shivers in its armour from Svalbard. A winter of war where I lay ill, grew an immense icicle outside the window. Neighbour and harpoon, memory without explanation. Ice hangs down from the edge of the roof. Icicles, the Gothic, turned upside down. Abstract cattle, udders of glass. 5. On a side track, an empty railway wagon, still heraldic, journeys in its claws. And 6. Night, snow haze, moonlight. The jellyfish of the moon floats above us, our smiles as we head homeward. Avenue bewitched. So, yeah, you can tell from that some of his poetry, at least, is, deeply influenced by the Japanese sort of haiku traditions with, images, tight little images, including seasonal references. 2012, Mo Yan from China, one of the very few Nobel poets from China. And Mo Yan is actually a pen name of Guan Moye. And his novel, Red Sorghum, this book here, was adapted into a film in 1988. Quite a successful film, at least in the West, I think. And it was in a period, I guess, of liberalised cinema before Tiananmen Square and all that sort of thing. The Nobel Committee said he wrote with hallucinatory realism that merges folk tales, history, and the contemporary. He grew up in a relatively well-off peasant family, including as a teenager living through the Cultural Revolution in China. In Chinese, his pen name, as I understand it, I don't speak Chinese, but as I'm reliably informed, his pen name means don't speak. And this was the advice his parents would give him to survive, I guess, the ideologically charged environment of the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, where, I guess, there was a chilling effect on free speech of the political fashions of the day. In 1976, after the end of the Cultural Revolution, Mo Yan joined, let's call him Mo Yan, joined the People's Liberation Army as a soldier and began to write, and also acquired a literary education through the PLA Academy. He wrote epic historical novels with that hallucinatory realism and a black humour. Red Sorghum from 1987 was his first novel, and it follows several generations of a Shandong family between 1923 and 1976. They experienced China's 20th century, the China-Japanese War, the 1949 Communist Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, and all the other things as well. The Garlic Ballads is another novel. It's a true story of when the farmers of Gaomi Township rioted against the government that would not buy its crops, very much a reference to part of China's history, post-communist revolution. Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out is a story about a landlord who's reincarnated in the form of various animals during the Chinese land reform movement. And Frog, his book Frog, focuses on the causes and consequences of China's one-child policy, perhaps worth a read. He kind of responded to the limits of socialist realism that he grew up with and incorporated traditions from Chinese literature, including the folklore-based classical epic novel Water Margin, Journey to the West and Dream of the Red Chamber, as well as later classics and folk oral literature. Now, there was a bit of a scandal with Mo Yan because several Western writers, including Salman Rushdie and Muller, the 2009 winner from Romania criticised Moyan's decision to participate in a commemoration of Soviet-Chinese talks and not to sign a petition to free a Chinese dissident, Liu Xiaobao. Whether that was justified, whether that was really rightly solidarity, whether that was rather patronising set of assumptions about this Chinese writer, I don't really know. His writing is quite moving. And let me just read a little section here from Red Sorghum, where he's describing one of the significant events of the Chinese-Japanese War in the 1930s. Granddad and father returned to their raised home, where they retrieved $50 silver from a hiding place in the wall. Then, dressed as beggars, they went to a small shop in town near the railway station where a red lantern hung. They bought 500 bullets from a heavily made-up woman, then hid out for several days until they found a way to sneak out through the town gate. They planned to settle accounts with Pocky Ling. On the afternoon of the 6th day following the ambush and the battle at the Blackwater River Bridge, the 15th day of the 8th lunar month in the year 1939, Grandad and father drove a billy goat nearly dead from the dung building up inside it to the sorghum field at the western edge of the village. More than 400 Japs and 600 of their puppet soldiers had encircled our village like a steel hoop on a barrel. Grandad and father hurriedly cut open the billy goat's stitched shut rectum, and after relieving itself of pounds of dung, it dumped several hundred cartridges onto the ground. They quickly scooped them up, ignoring the stinking filth, and engaged the invaders in a solemn and stirring battle in the sorghum field. Red Sorghum, where a lot of blood was spilled. Definitely a writer worth exploring. I found it actually quite hard to find any of his books apart from Red Sorghum in the local public libraries. I'm going to skip 2013 until a little bit later because events in 2024 have made people reflect anew on the 2013 winner, Alice Munro. In 2014, the winner was Patrick Modiano from France. He was a French novelist born in 1945 at the end of the war. He wrote what's sometimes called auto-fiction that blended historical novels with autobiography. And he is especially interested in the experience of World War II in France, as you can see here. This is what's called the Occupation Trilogy, which is a whole series of novels, autobiographical sort of novels, that look at the German occupation of France during World War II. His father was indeed from a Jewish Italian family, Modiano. During World War II, he was a bit of a rebel, I guess. He refused to wear the yellow badge that the German occupiers insisted Jewish citizens wore. He escaped deportation and became associated with the underworld to some degree, even though potentially the criminal gangs that collaborated with the Gestapo and the Vichy regime. And Modiano's first book was about a Jewish collaborator, and this severely compromised his relationship with his father. In 2010, La Place de l'Étoile, the first book in this series, the Occupation Trilogy, was released, and it evolved into the Occupation Trilogy. His books explore identity, memory, and the pull of the past. They fuse genres, biography, historical fiction, autobiography, and detective novels. And let me just read quickly from a part of this book from La Place de l'Étoile. This is really from towards the end. the blue walls of the room and the window, but by my bed sits Sigmund Freud. To make sure I'm not dreaming, I reach out my right hand and stroke his bald pate. My nurses picked you up on the Franz Josefskai tonight and brought you to my clinic here in Potsleinsdorf. A course of psychoanalysis will clarify things in my mind. You'll soon be a healthy, optimistic, sporty young man, I promise. Here, I want you to read this insightful essay by your compatriot Jean-Paul Schweitzer de la Sarthe, anti-Semite and Jew. There is one thing you must understand at all costs. The Jew does not exist. As Schweitzer de la Sarthe so aptly puts it, you are not a Jew. You are a man among other men. That is all. You are not a Jew. As I have just said, you are suffering from delusions, hallucinations, fantasies. Nothing more. A slight touch of paranoia. No one wishes you harm, my boy. All people want is to be kind to you. We are living in a world at peace. Himmler is dead. How can you remember all these things? You were not even born. Come now. Be reasonable. I beg you. I implore you. And then he says, I am no longer listening to Dr. Freud. I wonder if that is a reference to Jean-Paul Sartre, even to Jacques Lacan, the famous French psychoanalyst, and maybe is a bit of an accusation against the collaboration of some on the French left with anti-Semitism after the war. And Modiano is thought to be part of, I guess, the post-Holocaust literature, although written as a child of a collaborator rather than as an actual survivor like some other writers on the Holocaust. The 2015 winner was Svetlana Alexievich from Belarus. Now, she is a Belarusian investigative journalist who wrote in Russian. Her award honoured her for her polyphonic writings, a monument to suffering and courage in our time. Here you can see one of her books, Second-Hand Time, The Last of the Soviets. She is a writer, perhaps acknowledged partly by the Nobel Committee, more for her cause, and those she wrote about, than for her own writing. And that was part of the controversy or the scandal with this prize. Why is a journalist winning the Nobel Prize for literature is journalism, really, or even oral history, really literature. Alexievich became a journalist in the early 1970s and specialised in crafting narratives based on witness testimonies. They were oral histories of a kind, and in the 1970s and 1980s there were a number of memorable such oral histories. I even remember doing an oral history workshop when I was doing my history degree. People like Studs Terkel, or in relationship to the Holocaust, the great film by Claude Lanzmann, I think it was, Shoah, which is discussed in Inga Clendinen's book, Reading the Holocaust, which I discuss on my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com, so you might want to check that out. But there were also Belarusian models of this kind of documentary fiction. Alice Adamovich and others wrote a range of documentary fiction, including the novel I'm from Fire Village, which is about the villages burned by German troops during World War II or the Great Fatherland War, which is the subject of the harrowing film Come and See, one of probably some say the greatest war film ever made. Alexievich's topic, though, was not the Holocaust, it was Soviet history, the Second World War, the Afghan War, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Chernobyl disaster, the the demoralisation, the great suffering of the people of the former Soviet states, particularly during the 1990s. She wrote documentary-style books that are sort of oral histories, I guess, of the Soviet and post-Soviet experience. But it was the scandal about whether she is really deserving of a literature prize if she is really just a journalist. However, Alexievich contests the description of herself as just a journalist. She describes her work as documentary literature. And she said or wrote, "I've been searching for a literary method that would allow the closest possible approximation to real life. Reality has always attracted me like a magnet. It tortured and hypnotized me. I wanted to capture it on paper, so I immediately appropriated this genre of actual human voices and confessions, witness evidences and documents. This is how I hear and see the world, as a chorus of individual voices and a collage of everyday details. This is how my eyes and ears function. In this way, all my mental and emotional potential is realized to the full. In this way, I can be simultaneously a writer, reporter, sociologist, psychologist, and preacher. Perhaps also political activist or dissident. In the early years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, she was subject to some persecution by the newly liberated National Republic of Belarus, then and still ruled by Lukashenko. And her Nobel Prize came the year after the 2014 events in Ukraine, the coup, the Revolution of Dignity, the Maidan massacre, depending upon your perspective. And after several Western attempts to remove Lukashenko and much frustration also about Lukashenko from Russia, Alexievich has been a reliable critic of Russia for the West. Indeed, her first public statement after receiving the Nobel Prize was to condemn Russia over Crimea and Ukraine. In 2020, she was actively involved in the opposition movement, and she's criticised Belarus and Russia as criminal for their involvement in the conflict in Ukraine. Is she a Nobel-worthy writer or a politically favoured feature journalist? Perhaps the committee should have awarded the prize to the real heroes who are her informants in her documentary literature. And let me just read an example of that. This is from Secondhand Time. It's the last little piece of the collage that she assembles. It's called Notes from an Every Woman. What's there to remember? I lived the same way as everyone else. Perestroika, Gorbachev. The postmistress opened the gate. Did you hear? The communists are out. What do you mean? They shut down the party. No shots fired, nothing. These days, they say, we used to have a mighty fortress, and then we lost it all. But what have I really lost? I've always lived in the same little house without any amenities, no running water, no plumbing, no gas, and I still do today. My whole life I've done honest work. I toiled and toiled, got used to backbreaking labour, and only ever earned kopecks. All I had to eat was macaroni and potatoes, and that's all I eat today. I'm still going around in my old Soviet fur, and you should see the snows out here. And it goes on like that. So you get a sense that it really is, it's sort of like carefully selected collages of ordinary people's memories and experiences and ways of making sense of the history that they experienced. That was 2015. In 2016, I think it's the historic low of the Nobel Prize in terms of the selection of the Nobel Prize. In 2016, the winner was Bob Dylan from the United States, the American singer-songwriter. Now, long ago, I mentioned on the 120 Nobels series that there were two winners of both the Nobel Prize for Literature and the Oscar, the Academy Award for, cinematic arts. And one was George Bernard Shaw, and the other was the 2016 winner, Bob Dylan. And when Bob Dylan was announced as the Nobel Prize winner, or soon after, I was so outraged. I actually wrote an essay on it, which you can read here in my book, From the Burning Archive, Essays and Fragments 2015 to 2022. And let me just read from that. You can imagine my shock then, late last year, when the Nobel Committee declared the 2016 winner to be the over-celebrated bard of the 60s, Bob Dylan. Shock rapidly grew to serious doubts about the Nobel's claims to award distinctions, and then to questioning about what such fickle prizes mean about the culture. It was not the first unconventional choice by the Swedish Academy. The year before, a Russian Belarusian journalist, Svetlana Alexievich, won the prize. But at least her deep testimonies of the experiences of the post-communist Soviet states were unequivocally her own work, and she showed up to accept the prize. Mr. Dylan struck out on both counts. He did not go to his award ceremony. He had other commitments, a schedule full of the kind of unbreakable commitments made by aging rock celebrities. A rather sheepish American ambassador appeared in his stead, and Julie read what she had to say in the diplomatic tradition of lying for one's country, was Mr. Dylan's speech. But it gets worse. The committee insisted that to claim the prize and the substantial money attached, Mr. Dylan must give an acceptance speech. So he did, a mere couple of days before the deadline, after when he would have, if he had failed to give his speech, lost his check. But the ageing Rolling Stone or travelling Wilbury could not make it to Sweden. He posted his speech to YouTube, a 30-minute ramble about the great literary traditions from which he sprang, including Moby Dick. Perhaps this is innovation. Perhaps it is the undying rebellion of the 60s songster. Perhaps it is a sly parody of formality from which he chooses to stand apart. Or perhaps it is a lazy, arrogant, and incompetent contempt. You can read that whole article, Mr. Dylan's Bad Language, over in my book, From the Burning Archive, and I've got a link in the video description below. Of course, in 2016, there was a scandal brewing in the committee, a sex scandal, which I'll talk a little bit more about next week, but perhaps it betrayed a sort of cultural problem within the Nobel Swedish Academy, that there was both a sex scandal, a hidden sex scandal, as well as the choice of Bob Dylan as a Nobel laureate. You might disagree. I won't go into Bob Dylan's actual works here, but that's how I feel about it. So I skipped 2013 because, as I mentioned, there is a new scandal, a new sexual abuse scandal that has affected the reputation of the 2013 winner, Alice Munro. Now, Alice Munro was a great Canadian short story writer, and her writing, expressed the experience of, rural Canada and educated middle-class women in the post-war North American societies. She was a brilliant and artistically innovative developer of the short story form. But in 2024, her reputation has been tarnished by allegations, presumably reliably stated, that her daughter was sexually abused by her stepfather, Alice Munro's partner, and Alice Munro did nothing about it and hushed it up. And I write more extensively about this story at my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. Why don't you go over there, sign up to subscription, even take out a paid subscription. It's only about $8 US a month. It would really support my work. It's the best way to support my work. I'd love you to do that if you could. And you'll also find there my complete, after the Nobel Prize is announced, you'll find my complete archive of all the stories of 121 Nobels after the 10th of October announcement. Don't forget to join me for the live stream. And I'll see you next week for the last of this series of 120 Nobels. Thanks for watching.